Joining me now in New York is Ken Rogoff. He is a professor of economics at Harvard. From Washington, D.C., Al Hunt, executive editor of Bloomberg News. Congressman Anthony Weiner, Democrat from New York, and Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, Democrat from Illinois. I am pleased to have all of them here. I begin with Al Hunt. Why did the president do this? What does it represent, and what are the consequences, Al?
Well, he did it because he felt he had no choice, Charlie, because otherwise the tax cuts he felt were going to expire, which would have been disastrous for the economy. I don't think there's any question that they should have cut some kind of a deal. The question that critics, who I suspect we'll hear from in the show, will raise is, could they have gotten a better deal? The answer certainly would have been yes before the election. After November 2, it was very hard. And what they basically found, what both sides found out, is that the other side was willing to give a lot more than they thought.
So therefore, both sides could have made a better deal?
Well, I don't know that the Republicans could have, because they got exactly what they want. They were willing to give up a lot more on unemployment compensation and refundable tax credits and the like. And what Obama did was, of course, give in on the estate tax and on the upper-tier tax cuts. It was always clear that some upper-tier tax cuts were going to be extended, and the key issue was, could you decouple them? And frankly, the White House didn't handle it very well, but I will say that Congress really botched this up. Both the House and Senate leadership did not schedule any votes before the election, which I think was a catastrophic political mistake from the Democrats' point of view.
Does this somehow represent what the next 2 years are going to be about?
Well, yes, good and bad. I suppose John Podesta said it does, and he said it's what keeps him awake at night, because there'll have to be lots of concessions. I think this is a little bit sui generis in the sense that these tax cuts were about to expire, Charlie. So both sides had a gun to their head. No one wanted that to happen for most Americans to face a tax increase on January 2. There won't be very many issues like that, and I think to suggest that this shows there's going to be a lot of common ground, compromise, cave-ins, whatever one wants to call it, I think probably is an exaggeration.
Well, I certainly am concerned that we're especially, I think that the one that gives heartburn the most to the Democrats is the fact that we did the estate tax, that we actually lowered the rate to 35% and made it for multimillionaires. That was really adding insult to injury. I think many Democrats, and we're going to be having a caucus tonight, are offended by the deal that was made, and our leadership has said that actually there isn't any deal right now because we're going to be discussing how to proceed in the House. But one of the things that really bothers me is an untalked about threat to our economy, and that is the growing disparity in income, where the top 1% control 34% of the wealth in our country, more than the bottom 90%. And it seems to me that deals like this just exacerbate that, and it's bad for our democracy, bad for our economy, and I think a little recognized threat that we have to deal with, and this certainly makes it worse.
The substance of the deal, there's some good things, there are some bad things, but it's usually in this town with a president, it's you state what you believe, you fight for it forcefully, and then the deal becomes the thing at the end that you do. This time I must have missed something because I didn't see the fight. I didn't see the waging of a full-out campaign explaining why it is that it's fundamentally unfair to add literally hundreds of billions of dollars to the deficit to provide tax cuts for billionaires. I mean, there is a concern that I have that, the President Obama himself today said, oh, why is everyone complaining? This reminds me of what the debate was over the public option. Some people are never happy. Yeah, it's very similar to me, too, that we seem to find the president negotiate somehow against ourselves. But let's remember what this is about. This isn't about who wins and who loses in this deal. It's about what's going on to the American public. The idea has to be that our party, and hopefully our president, is every day fighting for the middle class and those struggling to make it. All too often, it seems like this is not something that we do out of aspiration. We do transactions. And maybe, look, compromise is not a vice. Doing deals is the way Washington operates. I understand that. But there really is a sense among many of my constituents and many of my colleagues that this was a deal that was made with a whimper rather than a bang.
So where do you go from here?
Well, I think, first of all, there's a question about whether or not we have the votes to pass this. I think a lot of us want to see the nuts and bolts of it. I really think to some degree, and you know, maybe it's Machiavellian of me to believe this, I think that the White House wanted to get a second stimulus, and this turned out to be kind of like it. It is $900 billion of unpaid for funding. But I got to tell you, I don't think it was a particularly good deal. I don't think we got what we should have. And I think now we are starting to see a trend. Maybe not for the next 2 years, but we've now seen it for the last 2 years. We make compromises on stimulus. We make compromises on health care. We make compromises on taxes, all of which are weak in the final product and all of which make it less fair for the middle class and those struggling to make it.
And I wouldn't be surprised if discussed by the Democrats is adding on to this agreement $250 to send to the seniors who haven't seen a cost of living adjustment in their Social Security for 2 years now, who are really struggling to pay their prescription drug costs and other expenses that they have. So we would like to see that the door is open a little bit for us to not necessarily renegotiate all of it, but to see if there aren't some more sweeteners for the majority of Americans. And the President noted that today, who are very concerned, and he too, about giving more tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. This is something he was not for, still isn't for, but felt that he had to do it. Well, let's see if we can make a slightly better deal at the very least.
What did you know that the rest of us didn't know?
Well, I think they're looking at a slow economy for a couple of years. There has to be some stimulus, and given the shift in the makeup of Congress, it's going to be tax cuts and not increases in spending. So I had thought they'd go beyond the Bush tax cuts. I think this is the opening salvo in the negotiations. I, by the way, Charlie, think this was a very pragmatic decision. They need to do something. The economy is still grinding away. They need some way to sort of slow down the rate stimulus is coming out of it. And I don't understand why there has to be a tax break for the wealthiest Americans. I totally sympathize with what congressmen and congresswomen are saying. I mean, it's very hard to explain the politics. Don't ask me. Do you need it for the economy? No, I don't think so. Although I would say there are a lot of business people who just feel Obama's against them, and everything he does is against them. And there's a certain confidence building to this in the short run, I suppose. But they did, need to strike a deal. The winds are blowing this way politically. You can't wait a year to get this done. So I thought it was okay. I can't explain why the wealthiest got this break.
What compromise would have satisfied you, reluctantly satisfied you?
Charlie, my critique is that we didn't even have, like, he was compromising with kind of this, it just kind of happened all at once. There was not the full-throated fight. And by the way, the President and Mr. Hunt are right. I think that Congress did not. We didn't handle this very well. To some degree, we in the House were waiting for Godot and waiting for the Senate to act on anything. We eventually decided what's the purpose of going ahead with anything when they kill everything. But I think that what a lot of people want, and the critique of the President here that I think is absolutely fair, is the President lose sight sometimes of the fact that he was elected to fight for certain values and certain principles. I think that everyone understands, and all of us understand, that sometimes that means giving a little bit. This is a fundamental bedrock element of why he was elected, was to restore some fairness, as Jan pointed out, to restore a sense that the middle class has something coming to them. It might be that this investment tax credit for business is very good, but to most middle class families or people struggling to get into the middle class, they look at this deal and say, boy, oh boy, this looks a lot like the tax cuts that President Bush would have given. And that's the fight that never really took hold. And I also think with something else, I think the President too often sees the vote count in the world as a static thing and says, okay, I don't have the vote, so let me go about the idea of compromising. But he has to realize part of his job as President is to go out and try to move the needle on these things, try to lead us to a place where we understand that tax cuts for the middle class is smart, tax cuts for very rich people is dumb.
Okay, what about if it was $1 million, that was a cutoff? Would you have bought in then?
I actually preferred that. I think there's reason to extend the tax cuts to all businesses. Again, I think there was room to move here, and I do believe that, frankly, none of that really happened. I think that the Republicans got a very good deal here. They got a big tax cut package. Jan is absolutely right. The estate tax piece was over the top, and now here we are. By the way, I don't want to hear a single one of my Republican colleagues complain for the rest of this session about deficits after they push so hard for this deficit-busting bill.
Well, let me comment on that, because no sooner did the president have his press conference, but Senator John Thune says, well, what we need to do now is get to work on spending cuts. That's good. Sounds to me like an absolute double whammy then for middle-class people. Where are those spending cuts that he has in mind? I think it's exactly those kinds of programs that, like help with college tuition or medical research or job training, things that absolutely help middle-class people, help our country, that they're going to target next. And so they're shameless about that. You know, give us these huge tax cuts that add to the deficit, and now we'll be able to cut the size of government. And that's what I worry about as their agenda. But I also want to say that I think rather than certainty, what businesses need are customers. And so I would have preferred to see more investment. You know, everyone's afraid now at the administration to talk about stimulus. The stimulus actually did work. We need more stimulus, but it's not going to come from giving tax cuts to the wealthiest, and certainly not through the changes in the estate tax.